how to make a Japanese knot bag. So start by placing your outer fabric right sides, so that's the side that you want to be the finished bag, together. You're then going to pin round the bottom of the bag and the top of each handle. You then need to repeat the same for the lining fabric. My fabric, it doesn't really matter which way round I've got it, but if you have got a correct side, again you place those right sides that you want to see together, and then you pin round the edge of the bottom of the bag and the top of each handle. Here I'm pinning an extra strip of lining fabric, 2 of those together, just so I can test that I'm happy with my machine stitching. And at the beginning of each line of stitching, I'm just going to stitch forward, then backwards, making sure that presser foot is down. And the forward and backwards at the beginning and the end will just secure that stitching. And then pulling plenty of thread out, removing the pins, and I can just open that seam and check that I'm happy with how the machine's performing. I'm happy, so I can go on to stitching the main bag, again forwards and backwards, and I'm carefully lining up the presser foot with the edge of my fabric to form the seam allowance, and I'm removing the pins before they reach the needle. And again, just forwards and backwards, just at the end of each row, plenty of extra thread. And I'm going to do the same across the top of the handle. So I'm just going to do the same at the top of the other handle, forwards and backwards at the end, just to secure the stitching. Then on my lining fabric I need to do exactly the same, forwards and backwards, follow the edge of the fabric against the edge of the presser foot, removing the pins. That gives me a nice even edge, forwards and backwards to secure the stitching, and then repeat stitching the top of each bag handle. Again, always remembering to make sure I've got the presser foot down before I start stitching, and keeping my fingers well out of the way of the needle. Using a really sharp pair of fabric scissors, carefully snip towards the seam allowance round all of the curves. Be really careful not to actually snip any of your stitching, just in towards the seam allowance. This will allow your bag to curve properly when you put it together. When you've snipped in all around the curves, turn the bag lining the right way out. So all of those seams are on the inside of the bag lining. You just see I'm lining up the bags. Then I'm going to place the bag lining inside the bag outer. Okay, this is placing the right sides of the bag lining against the right side of the bag outer, and I'm just really carefully lining up the seams on the handles. I'm just going to put a pin in to hold those together. I'm going to do the same on the other handle, again really carefully opening the seam allowance, lining up the bag lining and the bag outer, really spending a bit of time there and pinning those together. Then I'm going to pin round the top of the bag where it joins, and that's between the two handles. You can put more pins if you feel you need them to hold it nice and smooth. Just carefully lining up the top edge of the lining and the bag outer. But obviously I've got the wrong sides of the fabric facing me at this point. Now I'm going to carefully stitch round that edge. So again, I'm going to go forwards and backwards at the beginning and just carefully take the pins out as I go, and I'm lining up the edge of the presser foot with the edge of the fabric to give myself a nice even seam allowance. So just like you did before, snipping in the seam allowance towards the stitching with a nice sharp pair of fabric scissors. This will just allow everything to lie nice and flat when you turn the bag the right way out. Then through the edge of one of the handles, you're just going to pull the inside of the bag out, so you're turning the bag the right way round. So I'm just smoothing it all out. Then I'm going to tuck the lining inside the bag, fold the handles the right way out and fold the lining inside those. It's worth spending a bit of time to smooth it all out properly. And at this point, you can go and give the bag an iron if you want to, which is what I've just done there. This helps really smooth it out. Then I'm going to top stitch that inside edge. So that means I'm stitching as close to the edge as I can. So I'm sort of 1 millimetre away from the edge. And this just helps give the bag a really good crisp finish. You can skip this step, but your bag won't look as professional if you do. So I'm just going to trim all the extra loose threads out the way, and then I'm going to line up the edge of the bag so I'm happy with it, just making sure I've not got any extra loose threads. Then I'm going to take the seam allowances and just carefully cut an angle on those, so a 45-degree angle. So I'm holding them together and then trimming just the corners off. Make sure you don't cut into your stitching. Then I'm going to fold the edge of the lining up and the edge of the bag down. So this is the trickiest part of the bag. I'm just going to pop pins in carefully to hold those together as I go round. So I'm folding all those raw edges in together. So I'm using about 5mm of the fabric folding inwards, and just work your way around carefully, putting pins in. If you wanted to tack stitch this, you could, but I find it easier just to pin and stitch it straight away. So I'm lining up those seams at the top of the bag handle and pinning those. Then I'm going to repeat the same on the other side, trimming away any of those loose extra threads, then trimming my seam allowances on the inside at an angle. This doesn't have to happen, but it just makes it easier to fold all those edges in. So all those raw edges folded in and pinned together. So just like I did between the bag handles, I'm going to top stitch around this part of the bag. So I'm about 1mm away from the edge, placing the presser foot edge down, and then just carefully stitching forwards and backwards, and then forwards again to start, and then slowly stitching round the outside of the bag handle, removing my pins as I go and carefully holding the seam together. So just making sure I've got no loose threads as I go, and just taking my time to really get a nice quality finish. Okay, make sure any seams line up as you go, and just carefully stitching round the edge. Then I'm going to repeat on the other side. So again, lining up, making sure I'm right on the edge, just 1mm in, so I'm top stitching it together, carefully removing the pins, making sure my edges are lined up, and slowly and carefully top stitching all the way around that seam. Then I'm just removing any last loose threads, and you can see I can pull the big handle through the little handle, and there's your bag complete.